千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. So we did quite a bit of work on 47 last time. As we talked about previously, this chapter is about external pursuits versus internal self-examination. The internal self-examination is all about Tao cultivation. So this chapter will also talk about the Tao as the principle behind everything and what that implies. So let's take a look at the chapter overall. We started out last time with an overview and sectional analysis. As usual, it's a chapter that's 8 lines. And that would prompt us to assume, perhaps, that this is a collection of 4 sets of 2 lines. However, in this case, that turns out to be not exactly the case. Here's what the sectional analysis revealed. We looked at all the repeating characters, and what we found was this chapter being divided into 3 sections instead of 4. So as you can see in this slide, lines 1 and 2 are the first section, the introductory section, talking about going out the door, peering out the window. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then lines 3 and 4 are talking about, that will be another section, and you can see how the original Chinese characters correspond in 3 and 4, and translated into matching lines. The further one goes, the less one knows. These 2 lines usually require more explanation, and we'll definitely do that today. Then, in the last section, notice that it's not divided into 2 sets of 2 lines, but the last section is composed of 4 lines. Overall, we see a theme about turning inward, meaning rather than to chase after superficial knowledge in the material world, which is looking outward, it is better to look within to your connection with the Tao, to your own Tao cultivation for the real answers. So last time, we worked our way to line 6, and there's a lot to talk about in a brief recap on what we talked about before leading into line 6. Line 6 is a good way to begin our discussion today because the last 3 lines of this chapter contain the most important points. Everything leading up to it, from line 1 to line 5, are setting the stage to reinforce the meaning of the last 3 lines. So let's begin with a quick recap. So first, previously we examined the interesting line, the beginning line that says, without going out the door, know the world. Here, the metaphor is divided into inside the house, inside the door, outside the house, outside the door. Inside the house is metaphorically referring to your internal mental and spiritual landscape, your mind. Outside the door, outside the house, that's metaphorically referring to the material world. The world that is out there, the world we interact with when we talk to other people, when we go to work, when we drive on the road, all of that. So internal and external. Here, the emphasis, as we talked about, as we discussed, is that the search for answers has to be internal, which is why Lao Tzu says, without going out the door, know the world. When you know yourself in the Tao, you know the world. And we'll see how that works in just a moment. That is the metaphor. And we illustrated that metaphor by using a story, the Streetlight Effect. And that particular story illustrated the central idea, and elements of the story map to the real world. So the world is full of people like the drunk man in the story, searching far and wide in the material world only because they don't know any better. They're not aware that the real answers lies within, in the internal connection with the Tao that has to be cultivated. They assume the answer must be out there somewhere in the material world because it's easier to search in the material world than to look internally. So the lost keys in the story represent the answers to the key questions of life. It's what we all want. What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning? And overall, the Streetlight Effect is something that applies not just spiritually, it is also frequently used in academia, in the social sciences. So I think a good story for us to talk about and to discuss. Just like the narrator in the story, we want to be mindful of the fact that the keys can be found somewhere else, not under the streetlight, but within one's heart. Then we have another interesting line in line 2. Without peering out the window, see the heavenly Tao. It's in poetic construction, matching the first line. Without peering out the window matches without going out the door. And see the heavenly Tao matches know the world. So this is a similar but different metaphor. The window is a small, narrow opening to look out of. It's a small, limited, narrow view of the limited perspective. In life, it is all about the petty view that is overwhelmingly concerned about the material things. How much money am I making? Am I ahead or behind my peers in the rat race? Who's getting promoted? Am I getting promoted? In contrast to that petty view of smaller concerns, the greater view is about the vastness of the Tao. It's about life. It's about destiny. It's about the way the universe works, the way reality works, the way existence operates. So the greater view in metaphorical language is like being able to see the entire sky. 360-degree panoramic view. The view of the great Tao, it is what puts everything into perspective. When we lose sight of the greater view of the Tao, we tend to get really stressed out about the little things in life. The little things that drive us crazy, make us mad, lash out at other people. When we step back and we're able to take in the entire sky, the wide open vistas, we then realize that our concerns were really too little to bother with. So that's one of the better reasons to cultivate the Tao, is to be able to have that grand view of everything that puts your concerns into the proper perspective. So continuing with the recap, we talked about the Tao of knowing, and that is just, based on the first two lines, we can see how the Tao of knowing works. It takes what most people are able to do, what they see, what they perceive, what they know about, what they're concerned with, and further extend into the vast dimensions of the Tao, from the small to the great. That is to say, from the petty to the overall principle of the Tao itself. From the immediate to the distance, from surface appearance to the truth within, the essence, the insights. Insight, as I mentioned previously, is literally the view from within. And finally, from the partial, from incomplete view, which is metaphorically represented by peering out the window, to have the complete picture, the complete view, which is understanding of the wide open skies. And lastly, in connection with this, I quoted a line of poetry from the Tang Dynasty expressing this kind of knowing, and it is using a falling leaf to signify, to let you know about the beginning of autumn, that autumn has arrived. And you can tell that from a single leaf. Now, there's plenty more that we talked about. Just to quickly go through all that, we went from there to line 3 and 4. Line 3 and 4 talk about the further you go, the less you know. This is another way to say the harder you try, the less you accomplish. And even the original line, the further one goes, the less one knows, these lines require additional explanations because we typically see traveling as a positive, broadening experience that you can learn more by traveling. So Lao Tzu seems to be going in the opposite direction, contrary to our common sense understanding of the benefits of traveling. He's saying that the further you go, the less you know. How do we understand that? What's he trying to express? From the level of the harder you try, the less you accomplish, acting with attachments, that's easier to understand because we all know that when we act with attachments, we're more likely to mess things up because we make things more complicated. Thus, the better way is the simplicity of the Tao, or Wu Wei. So we're going to touch on Wu Wei quite a bit in our discussion today. Now, to complete our recap, we got into the lines where Lao Tzu reinforces his basic ideas through his observation of the ancient sages. Starting from line 5, he says, therefore, the sage, meaning sages of ancient times, ancient to him, that they were a particular way. They had certain characteristics, which he expressed in 3 lines, starting with line 6. And these ancient sages who lived way before Lao Tzu, they too had similar ideas. And it only makes sense because Lao Tzu was not the founder of Taoism, as many people believe. He took the ideas from the past of the ancient sages that lived before him. He basically organized their teachings into a coherent set that we know as the Daodejing. So for instance, the ancient sages had similar ideas about the internal versus the external. That is, the more you run around in the world, material world, gathering ever more information, the more you confuse yourself. Real Tao is opposed to that complexity. Real Tao simplifies. Real Tao is not complex. It is the essence of simplicity. So this brings us to where we were last time, talking about how sages know without going. That's line 6. And it sets us up for the discussion we're going to have today. So what I want to do is to begin with an overview of the three characteristics of the sages. So to do that, we simply look at the last four lines as a whole. Line 5 talks about the sage, and this could be the original Chinese, can be either singular or plural. So you can think of it as the sage or sages. So what about the sage or sages? Well, the ancient sages have three characteristics. That is, starting with line 6, 不行, without going. Line 7, 不见, without seeing. Line 8, 不为, without striving. So what do they all mean? That is the essence of our exploration today. The key to understand everything here, and this is really the most crucial part of 47, one key to understanding the three characteristics is to realize that each one of the three lines corresponds to a line that we have already studied. So let me show you how that works. Let me explain. Let's begin with the first of the three characteristics of the sage, and that's line 6, knows without going. This corresponds with one of the lines that came before, one of the lines in the beginning of this chapter. Can you guess which one that is? Here is the answer. Line 6 that says knows without going corresponds with line 1, without going out the door, know the world. It's basically another way to express the same idea. Internal, external, internal meaning in the house or in the mind, external meaning the material world outside the door. Here, in this slide, I use a couple of graphical symbols to bring that into sharper focus for us to represent. To the right, you see the Yin and Yang symbol. I typically use that to represent the Tao. Although the Yin and Yang symbol, strictly speaking, is just a Yin and Yang symbol, the Tao is actually everything. The Yin and Yang symbol, though, is a convenient shorthand. It reminds everyone of the Tao. So I continue to use that to represent the Tao. Then you would also see on the left-hand side, I have a graphic here of the world, the globe. So this represents the material world and all the complexities that it contains. So here I have line 1 and line 6, and I talk about Lao Tzu and the ancient sages. And this is because lines 6, 7, and 8 talk about the ancient sages. It's what Lao Tzu expresses or explains about the characteristics of the ancient sages. And then line 1 is what he starts out with in expressing those ideas. So here we go. At the beginning of the chapter, Lao Tzu expressed his position. Starting from line 6, Lao Tzu describes the ancient sages he studied, and it's useful to remember that once upon a time, Lao Tzu himself was studying the Tao, just like we are. He did not invent or create the Tao. Those are misconceptions. And then, further clarification, his ideas, the ideas of Lao Tzu, came from what they taught, what the ancient sages taught. And in this case, it's about the external versus the internal. I want to provide some comparison and contrast between the external orientation and the internal orientation. The external, concerned with the world, material world perspective. Internal orientation is about what is happening on the inside. What is the spiritual self? So this is the first of the 3 characteristics of the sage. I have common mindset on the left. I have the Tao mindset on the right. So you can guess where I'm going with this. The common mindset, I'm pointing to what we see, what we can observe as what most people are concerned about, what most people spend a lot of time thinking about. The Tao mindset is or should be the mindset that we're more familiar with through the work of cultivation, through studying the Tao. So the external, the common mindset, materially oriented thought process. The Tao mindset, internal, spiritually oriented Tao process. So let's take a look at these. The common mindset, what a lot of people are interested in, is the acquisition of new expensive things. So you can think of this as maybe, lining up days in advance to purchase the latest and greatest technology gadgets. That's one manifestation of that mindset. And yet another one is shopping, browsing, getting the latest fashion, jumping on a trend to acquire more things. It can also manifest that as, I want a luxurious, bigger house, large mansion, or I want a sleek, expensive $1 million sports car. These are all manifestations in the common mindset, the acquisition of new expensive things. So the Tao mindset understands that, knows that, is able to engage in it, but the Tao mindset expands beyond the material world perspective into the greater dimensions of the Tao. So the Tao mindset is concerned with other things other than material acquisitions. Namely, a great interest in the Tao mindset is to learn from new, enlightening experiences. And that, too, can manifest in different ways. It can be the Tao-centric way of traveling to different places to learn about everything there. It can be a Tao-centric participation in a gathering like this, where we basically learn from one another to enrich our own understanding of the Tao. So hopefully this too, in some ways, will also be an enlightening experience for all of us. So let's take a look at another comparison. In the common mindset, in what most people are usually thinking about, spend a lot of time thinking about, is how they look, how they appear, striking a dashing pose for other people. So visibility is the next one. Here, the common mindset loves being seen, loves the highlight, loves the spotlight. The common mindset loves publicity, and notoriety is acceptable. Why do I say that? Because in a common mindset, if you cannot have great publicity, you would then fall back on notoriety, because no publicity is bad publicity. That is, you become well known regardless, whether it is through something positive or negative. So then, in terms of visibility, what would be the Tao mindset? How would a Tao cultivator approach the issue of publicity, being known, being highly visible perhaps? In visibility, the Tao cultivator, this is what we've been taught, the Tao cultivator prefers the low profile, to come and go unnoticed, to take care of your business, causing no disturbance, and being able to freely move about without drawing too much attention. So this is different than sneaking around. This is simply not having a need to attract a lot of external attention, to try to gain external validation. This is you taking care of your business quietly, efficiently, effectively. If people notice, that's fine. That's your business. If they don't notice, that's okay. You come and go with the low profile, causing no disturbance. So let's take a look at yet another area of difference between the Karma mindset and the Tao mindset. Conversation, what do people talk about? In the Karma mindset, a large part of the emphasis, a huge amount of emphasis, a lot of attention is about money. Investments, what's a good investment opportunity? Real estate properties, stocks, what is it? Mutual funds, business ventures. So a lot of conversation in the Karma mindset, materially oriented, complexity oriented, is about money. So the Tao mindset understands that. The Tao mindset is not someone who lives in a world without money. The Tao mindset is practical and can engage in financial discourse when necessary. But in addition to that, there's more emphasis in the greater dimensions of the Tao, which for the Tao cultivator means the conversation has an emphasis on the intangibles, the philosophy, different perspectives, different takes, ideas, notions, concepts, all fascinating topics to explore, fascinating areas of conversation to get into. So not just about material world concerns, basically. And then the last contrast that I'll draw here is in terms of appearance. So the Karma mindset will be more concerned about brand names, designer labels. The idea is to be recognized, to draw attention to something that's expensive. The Tao mindset, in terms of appearance, simple, elegant, quality attire. So let me make it clear, this does not mean inexpensive. Not necessarily. You can have high quality attire that is elegant in appearance, simple, but not cheap. There's bespoke tailoring, there's personal tailoring. So all of these things are not either or, they can flow into and encompass one another. Nor are these the only areas of difference, the only possible areas of comparison and contrast. You can easily extend from this list to think about different ways that people have that external orientation versus internal. The orientation that is external is all about appearance. It's all about what looks good, what draws attention. The internal orientation, it's all about what's good quality-wise, what's good for you, what fulfills the real purpose other than drawing attention. So as an example, when it comes to transportation, you can think of the Karma mindsets, the external validation, validation hungry mindset as a stretch limo. A stretch limo draws attention. It's a statement. It's a gesture shown to everyone. And it's an attempt to get more attention, i.e., hey, everybody, look at me coming out of my stretch limo, that type of thing. The Tao mindset, in contrast to that, would simply be reliable transportation. And I pick the words reliable transportation deliberately because reliable transportation could be inexpensive, but it can also be very expensive. It can run the full gamut. In a similar way, you can think about other areas of life like food, like eating, in which case you can easily imagine that the Karma mindset that is focused on external appearance, that will be represented by something like an all-you-can-eat unlimited buffet, where you can stuff yourself and then afterwards be very uncomfortable, be totally stuffed, and maybe even feeling a little bit sick. Whereas the Tao mindset will be the opposite. It will be nutritional food that is good for you, but also delicious, that you do not eat to complete fullness, but 80% full, and the food being nutritional and being good for you will give you vitality, energy. It's fuel for excellence. It doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't make you feel sleepy. So that will be the Tao mindset. So internal versus external, this is one way of looking at it. Now, we know that when Lao Tzu expressed the same ideas, he also brought into consideration the idea of going places, traveling, that the further you go, the less you know. So we can't just ignore that metaphor. We have to talk about it too. And one of the aspects of that is when you think about how people assume there's a place that you must go to get spirituality. In the common mindset, that place to go will be on Sundays, to the church or perhaps to the temple, and that is seen in the common mindset as the source of religious teaching. The Tao mindset is different, and hopefully this is something that everyone already sees. It isn't Sundays, it's every day. Like every day is Sunday, so to speak. And what you want is not necessarily the source of religious teaching, but the source of spiritual wisdom. So the verbiage here is also deliberate, because a lot of times spiritual wisdom can be different from religious teaching. So the real source of spiritual wisdom is one's Tao cultivation, the Tao within. This means Tao cultivators are not opposed to going to church, going to temple, but they have a clear view that ultimately they must rely on their own cultivational practice and their own internal connection to the Tao for spiritual wisdom, not what the pastor says. Regardless of how well regarded the pastor or the master of at the temple may be, regardless of that, at the end of the day, it all ultimately comes down to your own cultivation of spirituality. So what about another one? In the context of going places, let's talk about vacation. In the common mindsets, when you talk to people, when you talk to friends, relatives, co-workers, they talk about their vacations, you can plainly see that a very common mindset is that people go to as many tourist attractions as possible. That seems to be a major goal in life. And what they end up with is superficial experiences. That is, I go here, I take a selfie, I throw up the victory sign with my 2 fingers, and then I go somewhere else, I do the selfie again with something else in the background. So these are touristy, quote unquote, for the lack of a better term. And the superficial experience is actually not what the Tao mindset is after. The Tao mindset can go to different places, will see the tourist attractions, but the focus is different. In terms of places to visit, the Tao mindset is about travel as opposed to vacation. And I hope everyone sees the distinction. And it's about immersion. It's about experience. It's about being in depth in one's experience at a particular place where you spend the time to really get to know that place. And by knowing that place, I mean everything. I mean the local culture, the food, the people. Cultivators challenge themselves to go outside of their comfort zone. You may end up in a place where you don't speak the language. It may be a challenge to connect with people there, to figure out how to be independent and find your way around, how to go from one place to another, navigate the map, and how to make friends. So that's a big part of what travel is all about for the Tao mindset. Connections with new people. Tao cultivators know that no matter where you go in the world, if you are sincere in your approach, if you are friendly, if you harbor goodwill, they know that your smile will be returned, no matter where you are in the world. They know that when you ask people about themselves, you can hear their stories, their past, how they got to where they are today. How cool is that? It's about experiencing new ways of doing things, new ways of looking at life. So travel has a very different meaning for the Tao mindset. Now, let's extend beyond just vacation. Let's go to pilgrimage. This is where I think about how people take on a trip to a faraway place where they feel like it will make them more spiritual or it will help them find themselves. That's relatively common. A lot of people do that. They're putting the focus on this distant destination, and their expectation is that when they get there, that it will have a magical transforming effect on them. So that will be a more common, more conventional idea of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage here is just a generic term that denotes what happens when someone goes to a faraway place in search of spirituality. Pilgrimage in the Tao mindset is a little different. In the Tao mindset, the Tao cultivator understands the real journey, the real pilgrimage really takes place in the heart throughout the entire trip. That when you go visit a particular place that is known as a holy site, it's actually your internal reflections, your observations, your thought process on your way there, while you are there, and on your way back. All of that entire totality is the pilgrimage. So it's a slightly different understanding. It doesn't fixate on the remote destination. It doesn't really have any magical properties. The Tao mindset understands that. Okay, so now that we see the internal versus the external, we can get into another characteristic of the Tao sages. Line 7, names without seeing. So this is a matching poetic construction. It matches knows without going. Here we have names without seeing. So let me explain. So this is what we touched on at the very end of our meeting last time as well, that people tend to rely on what they see. We have common expressions like see for yourself, seeing is believing. So we put a lot of stock, we put a lot of faith into what we can see. But we also know this. We know human sight is not that reliable. It can be fooled in a number of ways. Misdirection, well, that is what stage magicians do. That's their vocation, that's their job, is to use misdirection to fool what you see. Forced perspective, you know, when I talked about doing a selfie at a tourist attraction, forced perspective is like when you are holding up your hand, taking a selfie of that, but then in the distance behind you, far away, there is a tourist attraction, and it looks like you are holding up the tourist attraction with your hand. Forced perspective. Memory distortion. That's right. We can't always rely on what we see or what we remember that we have seen. The memory may be distorted and so on. So when I thought about providing an example for this, I wanted to use an example that is more modern. A lot of times we use ancient examples to illustrate, but sometimes it's interesting to bring a perspective to modern times. After all, we're practicing the ancient Tao in the modern world. So there is one example of an optical illusion. It's called an anamorphic illusion. And this is interesting. I don't know if everyone has seen this. Please let me know if you are already aware of this or if you have not seen this before. Let me show you what I mean. So take a look at this. This is what it actually looks like. It's a building that appears to be holding a lot of water, and the water come crashing in huge waves. This is in South Korea. Everything that you see in this picture is actually in motion. It's moving. And it looks convincing. It's a high-tech implementation of an optical illusion. So for this building in South Korea, when you're looking at is the building has most of its upper structure covered with a huge wraparound electronic billboard. That electronic billboard is like a giant television. It can display signs. It can display images. It can also display videos, moving images, animation. So it's just like the screen on your computer or laptop. Here, what it's displaying is a video of crashing waves. So the idea is that using forced perspective, when you are standing in one particular spot of the public square, the spot where this photograph is taken, you get the illusion of depth, as if the inside of the building is filled with water. And it's pretty convincing as long as you stand in or around that sweet spot. Now, because it's an anamorphic illusion, if you stand off to one side or the other, the illusion starts to break up. If you look at the same building straight on from the side, you get a different image. So a lot of the forced perspective is gone. You see, it's still a pretty convincing looking image. It looks great. But when you're seeing it from a different angle, you begin to understand how the magic works. Still looks pretty good, but it doesn't have that powerful illusion of depth when you look at it from the sweet spot, when you're looking at it diagonally across from the square. So this is just one of the many examples of how our human perception can be tricked. We can see something that is not actually there. We can see that building as a tank holding a lot of water, but there's actually no water in it. And vice versa. We can see something or fail to see something that is actually there. Something that is hidden from view or something that is not visible at the moment. So that's the vice versa part. Okay. So what can we take away from all that? We can reinforce the idea with line 7 that the sages would not be totally reliant on the eyes, on what they see. They realize that physical vision may not always be reliable. Another way to think about it is to consider how someone lacking wisdom may see something and not know what they're looking for, what they're looking at, or perhaps they misidentify, or they give it a different name. They give it the wrong name. In this particular case, in this example that we talked about, the unwise may look at that and think that there's water. But what it actually is video. So then the other end of the spectrum, the sages, will be someone who has genuine wisdom that he can name it or identify it accurately without needing to look at it. That will be the opposite. Hence, names without seeing. So for the sages, seeing is just one piece of the puzzle. They prefer to integrate multiple perspectives and different senses, not just the sense of sight, but different senses like touch, for a more complete understanding, a better perspective. And this is how they connect with the truth, how they get to the reality. And there's one last note to make sure everyone knows is that the last character here, Ming, naming, could be synonymous with Ming for clarity. And if you substitute that character into this line, you get the concept that the sages have a clear understanding of something without having to see it, without having to scrutinize. So I want to make sure you are aware that there's a couple of different ways to look at this particular line. So all of this will lead us into a discussion of the second characteristic of the sage. So we're about to go into more in-depth discussion on the second characteristic of the sages, represented by line 7, names without seeing. So simple characters, simple translation, and yet it contains a lot of ideas and concepts that are just asking to be explored. First, let's talk about the correspondence. Names without seeing, the second characteristic of the sage, corresponds with line 2. Without peering out the window, see the Heavenly Tao. So to name something is to know it accurately. Without seeing, without needing to look outside the window. So the Lao Tzu and the ancient sages had a common idea expressed in slightly different ways. The symbology that I'm using here goes from the Tao on the left to the world on the right. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. So first of all, we see this correspondence. Line 7 corresponds with line 2. So the ancient sages were able to demonstrate how one could know far more about the world from simple observations and the application of the Tao. So here's the idea. Initially, in this chapter, Lao Tzu says, you don't need to look out this small window, which gives you a limited view anyway, to be able to see the Heavenly Tao, which is the entire sky and everything that implies. So when we apply that in terms of knowledge, the idea is that you can see the vaster, greater truth from something that is near to you, close to you, at a smaller scale. You can expand from the small scale to the larger scale. Hence, the Tao, which is your own thoughts, perceptions, the Tao within you, your connection with the Tao, to the complexity of the world, the greater understanding. So let's make that more concrete. First, from the near to the far. Well, we know the people around us. We know how they are. We can see their characteristics as they go about their business day in and day out. And furthermore, we know ourselves. So from understanding of the people around you, this includes you as well, everybody you interact with, and then yourself interacting with them. So you know about dreams and aspirations. You understand that people have ideas about where they want to be in the future, dreams and aspirations. You look at the people, you know their good points, their innate goodness, their virtues, their kindness, helpfulness, generosity, all the positive aspects that you can see and appreciate about the people around you. Definitely. So you understand that part about them. This doesn't blind you from understanding the other part. Remember yin and yang. So where you see the virtues and the goodness, the kindness and helpfulness, generosity, etc., you also see the other side. Faults and failings. Yeah, they can be greedy, they can be thoughtless, they can be selfish, they can do all kinds of crazy things that are negative for themselves and negative for the people around them. There's no doubt about that. So when you understand people, it includes all of these and more. It includes what their hopes may be. It includes all of their good points and bad. So when you understand them like that, and when you realize that human nature is universal, that people are pretty much the same everywhere, the Tao cultivator is able to extend and expand from the insights about other people and yourself to people everywhere. That your insights about human nature as a Tao cultivator, you can apply that all over the world. You can apply it in your immediate vicinity in terms of people from different walks of life. Perhaps your social circle is one particular group of people that all share a similar background, all do similar things. A lot of times we become friends with our coworkers. We work in the same industry, the same business. There's more to talk about. But by understanding them and applying your understanding, you also get to figure out other people from different lines of work, different careers, different walks of life. Not only that, but just by understanding the people that you're familiar with, the people you interact with on a daily basis, you can also apply that understanding to other people from different cultural backgrounds. So here, of course, in North America, it's the great melting pot or the cellar bowl, as the case may be. We all interact, sometimes at least, with a diverse cast of characters, people from different cultural backgrounds. And yet, human nature is the same for them as it is for the people that you know very well. So you can guess at their dreams and aspirations. You know they have them. They're human beings. You can guess at their virtues, their goodness, and you can also guess at their faults, the negative aspects. And this extends even beyond people in your vicinity from a different cultural background. It extends to all people everywhere, different countries, even different continents. So from the near to the far, that is, from knowing the people around you, you can extrapolate from there to understand people everywhere. So the idea in the Tao is from the small, extend and expand to the great. And the small is only a figure of speech because the Tao within you is connected to everything. And this is also why when you cultivate the Tao, when you understand a particular idea or principle, you can apply that for a much greater understanding about everything, not just people, everything. One great example of that is the Sixth Patriarch. So this is Huineng, the Sixth Patriarch from the Zen Buddhism tradition. There's a sutra based on his teachings. It is called the Sixth Patriarch Platform Sutra. So this Sixth Patriarch was an incredible thinker who was able to explain any sutra, any Buddhist sutra, to anyone and make it so easy to understand. How did he get to that point? Well, he began by studying under the fifth patriarch and then becoming enlightened. So there's a whole lot to the story behind the process that he went through to be enlightened. But when he was enlightened, taught by the fifth patriarch, his master, he exclaimed. He made a whole bunch of statements, exclamations about the nature, about self-nature that is within everyone. So one of the things he said is particularly relevant to the point that we're making. You know, understanding the one thing, understanding everything. He said, 何其自信，能生万法. What does that mean? Well, he said, how unexpected that self-nature is able to produce all dharmas. Let me explain what that means. What he called self-nature is the Zen Buddhism term for the Tao within. This is the part of you, this is you in a very real sense. This is the you that is connected to the universal Tao. This is your true self, your original self. And if you prefer, you can think of it as your soul or your higher self, whatever works for you. He calls it self-nature. And his realization upon becoming enlightened was that self-nature, the true self, you, the true essence of you, is actually the thing that produces everything. All dharmas in this context means all manifestations in life. This includes all physical, material manifestations. They are all included in the myriad dharmas of life. So what he was saying when he exclaimed this was that the true self, the self-nature, is responsible for basically everything. When you understand and comprehend the true self, there's no limit to what you can understand beyond that. And that is because all dharmas originate from the self-nature. Now, Huineng went on to become the sixth patriarch, and he taught the concepts of Zen Buddhism. And he was amazing in that he was always able to explain the most difficult and obscure sutras in a way that everyone could understand. As a result, many people came to him, his own disciples, other scholars, practitioners of Zen Buddhism. They all came to him to ask him about this passage or that passage. So in one particular time, once again, people came to him and said, Master, could you please explain this? I just can't get it. I don't understand what it means. And he surprised them by telling them that, well, could you please read it to me? You see, I cannot read. That's right. The sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism was actually illiterate. Huineng was illiterate, never learned to read or write. This would surprise people because they would then ask, well, Master, if you cannot read, how is it that you can explain the sutra to me? Why do you need me to read it to you and then somehow you can explain? You know, people who were literate, who read a great deal of Buddhist literature, they could not explain. Here he was, illiterate, could not read. How was it that he could explain? And his response was 诸佛庙里非观文字. What does that mean? What he said was this: all wondrous teachings of the Buddhas are not dependent on words. It's dependent on the understanding of self-nature. He had such a clear understanding of self-nature that he automatically could connect with the deeper meaning of the 10,000 dharmas, which included the sutras that would be asked. So this was Huineng demonstrating the idea that by connecting with the One, meaning the Tao, you connect with the myriad things, all things. That you are to be one with the Tao means you are one with the world. So there's a lot more to the story of the Sixth Patriarch. As I mentioned, there's more information that can be easily found at Daoism.net. When you go to Daoism.net, you're going to see right in the middle, Platform Sutra. And I know that this surprises some people. Some people will say, but wait a minute, that's Buddhism, that's not the Tao. Why do you have Buddhist teachings in the middle of a Tao website? Well, I can easily answer that question by pointing out that everything is the Tao, including Buddhist teachings. Zen Buddhism has a special connection with the Tao because Zen Buddhism is essentially the fusion of ancient Tao teachings with ancient Buddhist teachings. So there's a lot of similar concepts, and you're going to see that Chinese cultivators of the Tao are always referencing back and forth the Zen Buddhist teachings of the Sixth Patriarch. So for those reasons, it's very much a valid choice for us to have the Sixth Patriarch Platform Sutra to be hosted at Daoism.net. And of course, within all the pages that it links to, you can expect to see the absolutely most accurate translations of the original that is available anywhere. Let's continue on with the second characteristic of the sage. This is about not being able to see something and yet being able to understand it completely. So there's more to this. There's more to this concept. Let me explain how this concept originated in ancient times. Ancient sages observed life, and one thing they noticed was the speed at which you travel, how different that can be in terms of your experience. So just by looking, and I'll get to that in just a moment, and I want to use a different example to talk about observing something that is relatively near to be able to see much more beyond that. And then we'll get to the traveling part. I am jumping ahead of myself. So let me bring up a tree stump to explain what I mean by going from the small to the great. Looking at the tree stump, we see the rings. What do the rings tell us? Well, it turns out we can see a lot. We can tell quite a bit. We can tell how old the tree is by counting the number of concentric rings. And that's because the rings are formed in these annual growth processes that result in lighter and darker bands, so we can count them to see how many years the tree has been alive or how old the tree is. We can further see that when we have thicker rings among the rings, that will be a period of time when there's a lot of water, rainy season promoting growth. So in a similar way, when we see rings that are thin, that will result from dry seasons. Not a whole lot of water, not a whole lot of growth. So we can tell when in the past, the rainy season was 3 years ago, dry season was 5 years ago. We can tell that. And there may be scars in the rings. And this can form when there were forest fires that the tree was able to survive. So the scars tell us that particular snapshot of when the forest fire occurred. And then overall, we can sort of take a step back and we can understand that the rings form a fascinating snapshot of past climate and environmental conditions. It's even possible for us to see conditions that are hundreds of years in the past simply by looking at the tree trunk of the tree stump of a tree that has lived that long, by looking at the rings. We weren't around that long ago, and yet we can tell a lot about the past. It's a snapshot of the past. So this is one illustration, one example of seeing something that's relatively simple and yet be able to deduce a great deal, to peer into the great Tao, so to speak. Now, what about in modern times? What would be an example of seeing the small and then being able to see the vast? So think about something really small, 1 grain of sand. We can understand 1 grain of sand. That is, with modern technology, modern science, we can understand the molecular structure of silica. We can understand its properties. And by properties, I'm talking about things like melting point, density, atomic mass, isotopes, and so on. We can also understand 1 grain of sand in terms of its practical applications. Now, we can take that understanding of a single grain of sand and apply the same understanding to all the grains of sand in the world. So this begs a question. How many grains of sand are there in the world? We don't have a precise count. You're probably not surprised, but we can estimate. So scientists have estimated using a variety of methods and come upon this incredible number right here. This is, how do we read this? This is not million, this is not billion, this is not trillion, it's actually larger than that. It's 7.5 with 18 zeros, 7.5 times 10 to the 18th, or 7 quintillion and 500 quadrillion grains. There's approximately that many grains of sand in the world, and we can know them all from understanding a single grain of sand. We can then appreciate the practical applications. You can make alloys like aluminum silicon. Ferrosilicon essentially means iron silicon, and these are used in various constructions for various purposes. This is probably one of the most abundant resources that we have, and also one of the most useful. And when we talk about silicon, I think it's easy to remember that we have this place called Silicon Valley. So silicon is extremely useful to us as the foundation of the digital revolution, as the basis of computing devices, computer chips everywhere. So all that from understanding a single grain of sand. So this is a telling example of extending from the Tao to encompass the world. So then let's talk about the third and last characteristic of the Tao sage. achieves without striving. Now, we have seen plenty of striving. We have seen how people will go all out and struggle, especially in the dramas, in a dramatic way to achieve great success. Now, I want to emphasize that striving, struggling to achieve great success makes for wonderful drama and a great story, but Lao Tzu is basically pointing out the lesson of Wu Wei is that it doesn't have to be that difficult. We all have the experience of trying too hard and then failing at doing something. But then Lao Tzu will say that there is a better way in the Tao, the Wu Wei method, where you can achieve without striving. So a little bit more about that. So when you achieve without doing a whole lot of work, you might have thought that it was just luck. But what if it was a skill that can be refined through practice? That's what Wu Wei is. Everything becomes easier when you become more skillful in the art of living life. It's smooth, it's graceful, it's incredibly creative and effective. And that's what brings us to the third and final characteristic of the sage. And here is where we bring about the element of traveling, because the last line, achieves without striving, maps to line 3 and 4. The further one goes, the less one knows. So line 8 corresponds with lines 3 and 4. And I want to make a note here that because they correspond, you can tell the further one goes means not just distance, but how far would you go to get something done, meaning what would you do? How much would you do? So the further one goes can also mean the more you do or the more you strive. In a similar way, the less one knows means not just understanding, but also the less you achieve. So when we say the further one goes, the less one knows, you can rephrase that without losing the meaning by saying the more you strive, the less you achieve. And when you say the more you strive, the less you achieve, you find that it maps exactly to the last line, achieves without striving. So now let's focus on the travel aspect of it. The further one goes, the less one knows. This is usually difficult to understand because we assume travel to be a good thing, to be a learning experience. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to demonstrate how this makes a great deal of sense. In fact, it makes all the sense in the world. This is where I want you to look deeply into the nature of travel from the Tao perspective. This is something that applied equally well in ancient times as it does today. In ancient times, sages observed that they can walk around, and when they travel at walking speed, they can observe everything. They can see how things are. They may see someone, they may pass by someone they know, they can wave in greeting, they can yell out to that person's name, they can ask about them, they can ask about their well-being. How are you? Hey, long time no see, that type of thing. We do the exact same thing. So walking permits that type of experience. But then you think about what happens when you run instead of walk. You don't have as much ability to notice what's happening because you are running, you are in a frantic rush. When you see someone you know, maybe the best you can do is, hey, maybe a quick wave. There's not going to be enough time for you to have a chat with that person. You would simply be running toward wherever it is you are going to. And this becomes even more extreme when you are riding a horse at a gallop, or perhaps riding in a carriage, horse-drawn carriage, traveling at a high rate of speed for much longer than you are able to run. So when that is the case, you have even less of an ability to notice what you are traveling through. You can't really see what's going on. You don't notice all the subtle details. Now, we have similar experience in modern times. Before we go there, notice this pattern. Walking, a lot of observation, a lot of knowing, a lot of noticing of little details. Running, less noticing, less knowing. Riding a horse or carriage, even less. So this was true in ancient times. Now I know, so in ancient times, the sages could tell that you can travel a long distance when you are riding a horse or carriage, longer than you can manage by running. But you know the least of all. When you run, you can travel further than you can by walking within a short period of time, but you know less than when you did as you were taking a slower paced walk. So that's a pattern that's always true, no matter what. The faster you travel, the further you go, the less you notice, the less you are able to tell what's going on. Now it makes perfect sense. The further you travel, the less you know. How about in modern times? Well, we have many more transportation options. It's not just walking and running. I can be getting on a skateboard, a bicycle. I can be riding a motorcycle. I can be driving a car. I can be riding on a bus or the train. The same pattern applies. Notice that the faster you go, the longer you can travel, the further you can travel to a particular destination that you could not reach before by walking or running. But the less you know about the journey getting there. Imagine, riding a train from one city to another. Well, it's at a high speed, you're going through the countryside. You're not really noticing a lot of it. Everything is passing by in a blur. That's what it means. So what is the ultimate form of modern travel, modern transportation in that sense? Well, it's the airplanes. When you fly across the country or from one city to another in an airplane, well, you can forget about noticing any details. When you're in a train, you can at least pick out some landmarks. When you're in a plane, you may not be able to see those landmarks clearly at all. And this reminds me that many years ago, I was constantly traveling on business. I flew from one city to another all the time, all over the US and Canada. So I could say to other people that, yeah, I visited all the major cities. I've been here, I've been there, I went to that city. But did I? This is the question from Lao Tzu. Did you really go there? In the sense that, what can you tell me about that place? What did you find out or learn about that place? If you did not learn anything, if you don't know that much about the place, then what is the difference between you staying home and going there? What a sobering question. Yeah, I say that I visited all the major cities of North America, but did I? Traveling on business meant I had a specific focus for every trip. I would arrive at the destination. The airport terminal was familiar. Sure. But what about the city itself? Well, I don't really know that much about it. I know the inside of the airplane, the airport terminal, the hotel lobby, my hotel room, if I was staying there for several days, the conference center, the office building, but that's not the city. That's not what makes that particular place special. So it's extremely true that the further you go, the less you understand. Certainly that was true for me. And you can imagine how this extends as a pattern to cover all life situations. In other words, you can imagine the more you gather tons and tons of information, the more confusing everything gets because there's never any time to get into anything deeply. What you gather is a mixture of good and bad information, and there's no quick way to tell what's quality information and what is not. Greater complexity leads to greater confusion. So Lao Tzu was right. He hit the nail on the head. The further you go, the less you understand. So therefore, from the complex to the simple, how do we handle the complexities of life? Well, in the Tao, it's actually simple in the sense of simplifying complexity. So then, from the many to the few is one manifestation of complexity, simplifying complexity. Discard physical clutter. You probably don't need a lot of things that you have lying around. They can be let go. Unlearn old concepts that no longer serve you. I especially find that to be true in studying the Tao because there are so many ideas that require further investigation and require that I let go of old ideas that are not very useful. Replace them with the practical ideas from the Tao. And emotional baggage. This is about regrets from the past. This is about the things that I wish I could have done differently. I'm dwelling on that. I keep living in the past. I have to let that go. It's a way to simplify my mind. And there is also, the Tao also talks about a way to go from the difficult, transform the difficult to the easy. So for instance, break up a daunting big project into component tasks, into parts. And then each task that you break them up into can be further divided into component subtasks. And when you have enough divisions in all of that, you can execute on the smallest, easiest task, and then move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. That's how you transform the difficult to the easy. So that's one implication of this. The initial level has to do with Wu Wei and Pu, which, as I said, is the principle of simplicity or simplifying complexity. So how do we do that? How do we achieve by practicing Wu Wei? First of all, we have to proceed without selfish or egocentric motives. So the expression for that, 无私无我, proceed without selfish or egocentric motives. When you are not acting with a selfish agenda, your focus is on the greater benefits for everyone, not self-serving, not self-dealing, not what would be advantageous to yourself. And then acting without trying to draw attention or showcasing yourself, because that would be a manifestation of the ego that would be out of a very egocentric motive. So 无私无我. And then the other part of it, 无是无非. This means that you approach the situation without prejudgment on what is right and what is wrong, or who's right and who's wrong. Especially true when there is a contentious situation. When there's contention, you want to be the neutral party that does not favor one side or the other. You want to win and keep everyone's trust. So now we have covered the third characteristic of the sages, and we should now be ready to talk about the summary for our time today. So here's what the summary looks like. One moment. Here's the summary. Takeaways from Daodejing 47. How do we apply the three characteristics of the sage? Number one, know internally without going externally. So this is where I bring up the concept that we can all visit the temple within. This is another way to say that the source, the true source of spiritual wisdom is not a physical place like a building, like a church or temple. Rather, it is your cultivation and your connection to the Tao within. And when you travel, as I mentioned, I want to suggest that you do so for the experience, not the destination. That is, spend time learning about a new place, a different way of looking at the world, rather than a particular place. Rather than thinking that you've gone to a particular place and that is the purpose of travel, Lao Tzu would advise you to say that no, the purpose is the experience. Second, understand without having to see everything. We saw plenty of examples today on how surface appearance can be misleading. So let the Tao guide you to greater clarity to connect with the truth. And we saw plenty of examples today that you can know the one and extend to the all. That you can know the principle and then extend to all of its manifestations. Lastly, number three, unattached actions to be able to achieve effortlessly. So this is what we just went through, that things can be as easy or as difficult as you make them. So keep in mind the metaphor for travel, that when you are going someplace very quickly, there's no time, there's no way for you to really get to know or to learn from the experience of going there. So you want to go at a Tao-centric speed. And you want to practice unattached actions to let everything come to you. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.